Okay, let's talk about the information shell game. You know the one? It's that classic trick of misdirection where the truth is hidden right there, in plain sight. We're about to dive into how this game gets played, not just on a street corner, but in the highest levels of power, and even in the documents you might be reading every single day. And this quote right here from an editorial about the recent Epstein files release is the perfect place to start. It's a simple but really powerful idea. Just dumping a bunch of documents on the public doesn't automatically mean we get the truth. The way they're released, the timing of it, the whole story built around it, that can turn a search for answers into just a whole lot of distracting noise. So how does this whole transparency as noise thing actually work in the real world? Well, let's take a closer look at that very high-profile example. Was the release of those Epstein files a genuine move for public disclosure, or was it maybe something else? Well, according to this piece by William Garrison, the release was less about justice and way more about political strategy. The argument he makes is that the timing was no accident. It was picked specifically to steer the conversation, to weaponize information, and shift the public's focus from one major political figure to another. This is a perfect example of what we call curation. You're not just giving people the facts, you're carefully choosing which facts to give them and when to create a very specific reaction. But political misdirection is really just one move in this whole information shell game. To really get how it's played, we've got to look at the more subtle and honestly, often more powerful ways information gets hidden, both with technology and with the law. See, the best way to hide something isn't always to lock it up in a vault. Sometimes it's about putting it right out in the open, but in a way that just makes it invisible. This is where the modern tools of secrecy, both digital and legal, come into play. They create these vacuums, these empty spaces, right where everyone can see them. Let's start with something we've all seen, the humble black box, that digital reduction in a PDF. We see it, and our brain just assumes the information behind it is gone for good. But what if I told you that in a lot of cases, that black box is more like a leaky sieve than a solid wall? Now, this is where it gets really fascinating. It's not like the secret words are still hiding under the black ink. Nope. It's that removing them actually changes the spacing of the words around them in these tiny, microscopic ways that you'd never see with your eyes, but a computer can. This digital fingerprint can sometimes be used to figure out exactly what was erased. And this isn't some rare, super secret flaw. Research shows that everyday software that literally millions of us use, we're talking Microsoft Word, Adobe Acrobat, can create these leaky redactions. You could be leaving sensitive information totally exposed and not even have a clue. Okay, so that's the tech side of things. But beyond the digital world, there are these incredibly powerful legal tools designed to control the flow of information, right from the very top. Let's talk about executive privilege. It's basically the president's asserted right to keep information away from Congress, the courts, and from us, the public. And this slide right here highlights a really important legal difference. The power to hide information totally changes depending on the situation. If it's a request during a routine congressional investigation, that's one thing. But a demand for information during an impeachment inquiry, that is a whole different ballgame with a whole other level of constitutional power behind it. And hey, this isn't some newfangled idea. This quote from way back in 1796 shows that from the very beginning, the founders of the U.S. saw impeachment as the ultimate check on power. It was a tool that could get into the most secret recesses of government to make sure that nobody was above the law. All right, so with all these high-tech and high-powered tools for hiding information, how do we fight back? How do we find the so-called ghosts in the data? Well, let's explore some of the powerful tools we have for detection. And what's really cool is that some of the best tools for spotting this kind of manipulation come from some pretty unexpected places. We're talking about mathematics and medical science. These fields are like experts at spotting when patterns in data just don't look natural. First up is something called Benford's law. It was made famous by an accountant named Mark Negrini who used it to find financial fraud. And it's this kind of spooky, fascinating pattern that numbers in the real world almost always follow. We're talking about everything from the length of rivers to stock prices to street addresses. So here's the key takeaway. In pretty much any big organic set of numbers, the number 1 is going to show up as the first digit about 30% of the time. Meanwhile, the number 9, it shows up less than 5% of the time. The whole distribution is naturally tilted toward the smaller numbers. So, when you're looking at a set of numbers and they don't follow this curve, like if all the first digits are spread out pretty evenly, that's a massive red flag. It's a huge clue that the numbers probably weren't generated naturally. They were likely just made up. Now let's talk about a different kind of redaction. This one doesn't use black boxes, but it can be even more deceptive. It's called redaction bias, and it's all about making data points that are inconvenient, well, simply disappear. And as this research shows, it's shockingly easy. You can completely flip the results of a scientific study. You could turn a drug that failed into a miracle cure, for instance, just by deleting a few results that don't fit the story you want to tell. It's an incredibly powerful way to bend the truth without ever technically telling a lie. Okay, so far we've been looking at individual documents, at specific data sets. But now let's zoom the camera all the way out and look at the biggest information game of all, the creation of history itself. You see, this whole game of picking and choosing, of leaving things out, it doesn't just happen with one document at a time. It happens on a massive scale when we create our historical records. The very act of building an archive is itself an act of controlling information. The philosopher Achille Mbembe has a really powerful way of looking at this. He argues that an archive isn't some neutral box full of facts. It's a statement. It's a declaration of what we, as a society, have decided is important enough to be remembered. Think about it. Deciding what to save and what to let crumble into dust, what becomes history and what's just forgotten. That is a huge exercise of power. Every single document that gets saved is given this special privileged status, while countless others are basically judged unarchivable and just left to disappear. So I guess the ultimate takeaway is this. What we get to see is only ever part of the story. It's a story that's been shaped by political timing, by leaky technology, by legal loopholes, and by the quiet, powerful judgment of someone deciding what's worth remembering. The biggest secrets aren't always in the redacted files. They're in the stories that were never even considered worthy of the archive in the first place. So the real question isn't just what's behind the black box, but what never even made it into the box at all.